Picture this. In 2002, a 20-year-old snowboarder from Canada stands among the world's best athletes at the Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City. His name is Ryan Wedding, and at that moment he represents everything the Olympic dream is supposed to be about: discipline, national pride, and years of relentless training. But more than 2 decades later, that same man would appear in a completely different headline. According to U.S. federal authorities, Wedding eventually became a key figure in a large international cocaine trafficking network, one that investigators say moved massive quantities of drugs across North America, with connections reaching into Mexico and beyond. At one point, he was even placed on the FBI's most wanted list, with a reward of up to $15 million offered for information leading to his capture. It is a transformation that sounds almost unbelievable. How does an Olympic athlete end up accused of running a transnational criminal operation? What choices, alliances, and turning points pushed him from professional sports into the dangerous world of organized crime? To understand the rise and fall of Ryan Wedding, we have to start at the beginning, long before the investigations, the indictments, and the international manhunt that would eventually bring his story to a dramatic turning point. Ryan James Wedding was born in 1981 in Thunder Bay, Ontario, a city known for its harsh winters and deep roots in Canada's skiing culture. Unlike many crime stories that begin with hardship, Ryan's early life looked nothing like the path he would later take. His family was deeply involved in winter sports. His grandparents owned Mount Baldy Ski Resort, and members of the Wedding family had spent years building a reputation in the local skiing community. From the moment he could stand on his own feet, Ryan was already learning how to navigate snowy slopes. His father had experience as a competitive skier, and the environment around him was filled with athletes, coaches, and people who understood the discipline required to succeed in winter sports. For a young athlete growing up in that environment, the dream of competing at the highest level did not seem unrealistic. When the family later moved to British Columbia, closer to the mountains near Vancouver, Ryan discovered snowboarding, a sport that was rapidly gaining popularity across North America in the late 1990s. Coaches who worked with him during those years often described him as fearless. While other riders hesitated before attempting difficult runs or aerial tricks, Ryan had a reputation for pushing forward without hesitation. That kind of confidence quickly caught the attention of trainers building Canada's competitive snowboarding program. By the time he was in his late teens, Ryan was already competing at a national level, and his performances were strong enough to earn him a place representing Canada at the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City, Utah. At just 20 years old, he had achieved something millions of athletes around the world never experience. Standing among Olympic competitors meant that years of training had finally paid off. Yet, despite the prestige that came with competing at the Olympic level, the reality of life after the Games can be very different from what many people imagine. Olympic recognition brings respect, but it does not always guarantee long-term financial success. Sponsorships are limited, careers can be short, and many athletes eventually face the difficult question of what comes next after the spotlight fades. For Ryan Wedding, that question would become the first turning point in a story that would eventually move far beyond the world of competitive sports and into something far darker. After the 2002 Winter Olympics, Ryan Wedding returned to Canada with the reputation of an Olympic athlete. But the reality of life after the Games was far less glamorous than many people imagined. Competing at the highest level brought recognition, yet it did not automatically guarantee financial stability or the kind of lifestyle he seemed to crave. Like many former athletes trying to find their footing after elite competition, Ryan had to figure out what his next chapter would look like. At first, his life appeared fairly normal. He spent time in British Columbia, working various jobs while staying connected to the nightlife scene around Vancouver, a city known for its busy clubs and social circles where athletes, entrepreneurs, and underground figures sometimes crossed paths. It was during this period that people close to him began noticing subtle changes. The quiet young athlete who once focused on training started becoming more interested in status, expensive clothing, and the kind of lifestyle that required far more money than most ordinary careers could provide. According to accounts later described in investigations, Ryan spent time working around nightclub security, an environment where he inevitably encountered people connected to the local drug trade. Vancouver, in the early 2000s, had already developed a reputation as a hub for organized crime networks competing for territory tied to marijuana production and distribution. Within that environment, it became easy for someone with ambition and connections to drift toward opportunities that promised fast money. At first, the step into illegal business did not appear dramatic. Ryan reportedly became connected to a large marijuana cultivation operation located in Maple Ridge, British Columbia, a rural area where warehouses and farms could be used to hide sophisticated indoor growing facilities. According to later law enforcement reports, the operation involved thousands of cannabis plants, advanced lighting systems, irrigation equipment, and a structure designed to produce high-quality product for distribution across Western Canada. The profits from operations like this could reach hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and for someone seeking quick wealth, the temptation was obvious. But that kind of success also attracted attention. Unusual electricity usage patterns, property records, and surveillance methods eventually brought investigators to the location. In 2006, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police conducted a major raid on the property, discovering thousands of plants and large quantities of processed cannabis. Even though authorities could not directly link every individual involved to the operation at the time, the incident should have served as a clear warning. Instead, it appeared to have the opposite effect. Rather than stepping away from the illegal trade, Ryan Wedding seemed to interpret the experience as proof that he could operate in that world and survive. And that belief would soon lead him towards something far more dangerous than a marijuana grow operation in rural Canada. By 2007, the situation around Ryan Wedding had started to change dramatically. According to accounts from people who knew him at the time, the profits from earlier ventures were no longer enough to sustain the expensive lifestyle he had built. Luxury apartments, high-end vehicles, and constant spending required a steady flow of money. And when several risky deals reportedly went wrong, the pressure increased. Instead of stepping away from the criminal world, Ryan began looking for opportunities that were far larger than anything he had attempted before. This was the point where he connected with individuals who had access to international trafficking networks. One of the most important figures during this period was Hassan Shirini, a Persian-Canadian associate known to authorities for connections within organized crime circles. Through these contacts, Ryan was introduced to a financial system known as Hawala, an informal money transfer network that has existed for centuries across parts of Asia and the Middle East. The system operates on trust between brokers rather than traditional banks, allowing money to move across borders without leaving a typical paper trail. For people involved in illegal trade, it provided a way to move large sums of cash without attracting immediate attention from financial regulators. With access to that kind of system, Ryan began exploring the possibility of purchasing cocaine in the United States and transporting it back into Canada, where the market price was significantly higher. It was an enormous leap from his previous activities, and the risks were just as large as the potential profits. In June 2008, Ryan and several associates traveled to Southern California, believing they were about to finalize a deal involving 24 kilograms of cocaine supplied through international contacts. What they did not realize was that federal investigators were already monitoring the operation. According to court records, the supposed supplier they were negotiating with was actually cooperating with the FBI, and the transaction had been turned into a controlled operation designed to gather evidence against the trafficking network. Over the course of several days, agents monitored meetings, recorded phone calls, and tracked the movement of cash through intermediaries. When the moment came to complete a smaller test deal for 1 kilogram, authorities moved in. Ryan Wedding was arrested in San Diego, suddenly facing federal charges related to drug trafficking. For most people, that moment would have marked the end of the story. A criminal case in the United States typically carries severe consequences, especially when large quantities of narcotics are involved. But in Ryan's case, the arrest did not end his involvement in the drug world. Instead, it would become the beginning of a transformation that investigators later described as far more dangerous than anything he had done before. After his 2008 arrest in San Diego, Ryan Wedding faced a reality that could have ended his story right there. Federal prosecutors charged him with conspiracy to distribute cocaine, a crime that carried a potential sentence of many years in prison. For someone who had once represented Canada at the Olympic Games, the contrast was dramatic. Yet, during court proceedings, Wedding presented himself very differently from the image investigators were building. According to court records, he expressed remorse and told the judge that his involvement in drug trafficking was a mistake that did not represent who he truly was. He described his desire to rebuild his reputation and move forward with a legitimate life. The court ultimately imposed a sentence significantly lower than what he initially faced. Instead of spending a decade behind bars, he received roughly 4 years in federal prison, with credit for time already served. On paper, it looked like a second chance, but inside the federal system, prison can expose inmates to networks that extend far beyond their previous experience. Facilities holding international trafficking suspects often bring together people from multiple criminal organizations, each with their own knowledge of logistics, supply routes, and financial systems. According to investigators who later examined Wedding's activities, his time in custody did not disconnect him from the drug trade. Instead, it appeared to broaden his understanding of how international trafficking operations functioned. By the time he was released around 2011, Ryan returned to Canada with far more knowledge about cross-border networks than he had before his arrest. He eventually settled in Montreal, a city that had become an important hub for international shipping and trade. For someone looking to rebuild connections in the underworld, the location provided access to ports, transportation corridors, and contacts linked to multiple trafficking groups. Over the next few years, authorities believe Wedding quietly began rebuilding his network. Public records suggested that financially he was struggling. In 2014, he even filed for bankruptcy, claiming he had no stable income and was relying on family support. On the surface, it appeared as if his life had collapsed after prison. But behind that appearance, investigators later alleged that something far larger was beginning to take shape. And by 2015, law enforcement agencies in Canada were already starting to piece together a new investigation that would push Ryan Wedding into a far more dangerous world than the one that had led to his first arrest. By 2015, investigators in Canada were beginning to connect the dots around a new trafficking operation that appeared far larger and more sophisticated than anything Ryan Wedding had attempted before. Authorities believe the network was working to move large quantities of cocaine from suppliers in South America through established corridors in Mexico and eventually into distribution points across North America. According to later indictments filed by U.S. prosecutors, the organization relied on complex transportation routes, layered communication systems, and trusted intermediaries who handled different parts of the operation without fully knowing how the entire network functioned. One of the key strategic locations mentioned in the investigation was Los Angeles, which authorities say served as an important logistics hub for shipments moving between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. From there, the drugs were allegedly stored in multiple locations before being transported north by long-haul drivers, who blended in with legitimate freight traffic crossing the border. The system was designed to reduce risk by separating responsibilities across many participants. Drivers did not know the full route, storage managers did not know the suppliers, and financial handlers were often removed from the transportation chain entirely. This compartmentalized structure allowed the operation to continue functioning even if one part of the network was disrupted. Prosecutors later alleged that the organization was capable of moving enormous quantities of cocaine each year, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in potential revenue. At the same time, investigators also linked the network to a series of violent incidents across Canada and the United States, including targeted killings connected to disputes within the trafficking world. Those allegations would eventually become a central part of the case against Wedding and his associates. As law enforcement pressure increased, Canadian authorities launched Project Harrington, a major operation designed to dismantle the suspected trafficking pipeline. In April 2015, coordinated raids were carried out across multiple cities, with several arrest warrants issued for individuals believed to be connected to the network. But when officers arrived at the residence where Ryan Wedding was believed to be staying in Montreal, he was already gone. Investigators later concluded that he had fled the country, eventually relocating to Mexico, where prosecutors say he continued running the organization while under the protection of powerful criminal groups. From that point forward, the former Olympic athlete was no longer just a suspect in a Canadian investigation. He had become the focus of a much larger international manhunt that would involve agencies from multiple countries, and it would take nearly a decade before that pursuit finally came to an end. When investigators finally tracked down Ryan Wedding in January 2026, it brought an end to a story that had stretched across more than 2 decades and multiple continents. The former Canadian Olympic snowboarder, once celebrated for representing his country at the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City, was now facing a completely different reality. After years of operating in the shadows, authorities located him in Mexico and transferred him into U.S. custody, where prosecutors began building their case around allegations of international drug trafficking, money laundering, and violence connected to the network he was accused of leading. For many observers, the capture marked the collapse of what officials described as a multinational trafficking enterprise that had moved massive quantities of cocaine through Mexico, the United States, and Canada. But beyond the statistics, the story of Ryan Wedding represents something deeper than just a criminal investigation. It is the story of how a life filled with opportunity can slowly drift in a completely different direction through a series of choices. From Thunder Bay, Ontario, to the Olympic slopes of Salt Lake City, and eventually into the world of international crime. The path was not shaped by a single moment, but by years of ambition, risk, and decisions that carried increasingly serious consequences. Today, the final chapter of Ryan Wedding's story will likely be written inside a courtroom rather than on a snowboard course. The outcome of the case will ultimately be decided by the justice system, but the transformation itself already stands as one of the most unusual and dramatic falls from grace in modern sports history. It is a reminder that even someone who once stood on the Olympic stage can end up facing a completely different spotlight, one cast by the world's largest law enforcement agencies.